and potential for scale-up of do-it-yourself artificial pancreas technology. And I'm always going to hand over to one of the co-leaders of the project, Katarina, who's going to present some of the preliminary findings of our research to date. I'm going to hand you over to Katarina now. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Katarina. I'm a medical doctor in pediatric endocrinology and diabetes from Charité Berlin, and I'm also a person living with diabetes. I'm going to talk about DIY APS in the clinic and in research today. And I guess you could say I'm a hybrid human with a hybrid closed loop, being a patient and a doctor at the same time. I'm also involved with the Open Project as a researcher, and here is my conflict of interest disclosure. I like to be always very transparent with where my grant money and my research money is coming from. And as Adrian has said, the industry is now consulting us, which I think is great. Here are my conflicts of interest. My own closed loop story began 18 years ago. This was a picture of mine shortly before I got diagnosed with type 1. As you can see, I've always wanted to become a doctor or a pediatrician. But I had no idea that I would become a pediatric endocrinologist at the time. I was always a very early adopter in tech. So you see my first insulin pump there. That was 18 years ago, the beautiful Medtronic 508. And 2 years ago, I decided to no longer wait and to build my own DIY APS. So this was when my RideLink arrived in the mail, which is the small device that you use to connect an iPhone to, at the time, a Medtronic pump, which I'm now carrying around in a fish. And this was me being really happy, closed looping for the first time in my life. It was an amazing day. And this was my first year with DIY closed loop. I've had my A1C measured 1 year after I began DIY looping, and it was the first time that I was in normal range. This is in German. I'm really sorry, but it means normal range. So it means
that's good.
It means good. Yeah, it was very good for me because I would have never imagined, even as a doctor specialized in this field, that this would be in the cards for me. Diabetes is hard. Even if you're a doctor working in diabetes, it is a challenge every day. But with the DIY closed loop system, you would wake up like this almost every morning, and you would sleep like a baby. We will talk about outcomes later. And recently, my DIY setup has changed. So we were in Copenhagen with the group, which is why this chapter of my life. I guess you can say that is called Cordless in Copenhagen, when I switched over from a wired pump to the Omnipod in iOS Loop, which was incredibly liberating not to be on a wire for the first time in 18 years. I'm still like grabbing and looking for my old pump, which is no longer there. It's amazing. Okay, coming back to the topic. Why are we doing this? Diabetes every day for all of us is a 24/7 job, right? You cannot take holidays. You, as Dana said, go to sleep occasionally and don't always think about it 24/7, but it is a 24/7 job. And even with no DIY technology involved, I'd like to emphasize that it's already DIY most of the time, right? As a doctor, I see my patients about 1 hour per year, but the rest of the time, they are DIY, even with no DIY technology involved. And it's quite frustrating on a day-to-day basis, right? You may have seen this graphic. This is a study that monitored A1C values of people in the USA, depending on their age. And the little elevation that you see, this is puberty. But I don't know if you guys can see it, but puberty in diabetes lasts up to 30. And as one can confirm that, I just turned 30. What you can also see that the orange graph is the old data and the blue graph is the new data from 2018. It's getting worse. Why? And this, guys, is target range. This is an A1C of 7.0, and target range has been adapted recently in the guidelines from 7.5 to 7.0. Nobody's getting there. What makes me also really, really sad is that you see the graph declining after the age of 60, which in another scary study that I've seen is our life expectancy at the moment. So only the guys that are better and live beyond 60 get a better A1C. Nobody likes to hear this, right? And if you look at the evolution of diabetes therapy or a tech in diabetes therapy, you probably still remember or have heard scary stories about these glass syringes, and you've seen that diabetes tech or diabetes therapy became more technical over time. But the idea of a closed-loop system is actually older than you might think. So the first closed-loop system that was tried in an IV clamp in a hospital was invented in the 80s. It's this little girl up there. But the reason why it was not really applicable or portable was because computers were really big in the 80s. You might know this picture of the first person with an insulin pump carrying it around as a backpack. So imagine what a closed-loop system would have looked like. It would be like half the size of the room. And this is the latest diabetes tech in 2019, right? There's still no closed-loop system there. And Dana has pointed that out before. Why are our devices not perfect? And I'd like to quote Dana again here. Patients are not stupid, and there's so much patient knowledge that remains untapped by academia and industry. We're trying to tackle this with open, but this is how devices are manufactured or put together at the moment, with no users involved. And if we can change the existing devices, what can we do? What can we do to get to this target range? And quoting Dana here again, the computer is doing a much better job than the human here. Why not put an algorithm in between all these decisions of data and information being executed in a therapy decision, so we can focus on others, what the latest diabetes tech in 2019 looks like. It's DIY. The closed loop has been there for many, many years already. And here's another outcome graph from just one person. It's our friend Martin. It's a man living in his 30s, and I guess in the scientific literature you would say he has a flexible lifestyle. You see his glucose percentiles when he was still on MDI with a CGM. And you can see that he was struggling quite to achieve target range. This is 4 millimole and this is 10. So overnight and also during the day he would be quite high, but still in the early morning he would wake up every fourth night with a hypo. And then our friend decided to try a DIY closed loop. We haven't had a pump before. He just went on a closed loop. This is data from 2 weeks, and see what happened in the first 2 weeks with a DIY system. He didn't change his lifestyle whatsoever, but the problem improved a bit. And this does not only work for one person. With the Open project, we have done a survey. It was an unexpected gift, I guess you could say, because we actually just asked people for their motivation to build a DIY system and expected like 50 to 100 people to reply. We got over 1,000 replies. And the people also reported their A1C before and after they started looping. And you remember this graph from before, right? The red star is where the people were before, and this is with a DIY system. We're not even on the graph. And now I'm putting my healthcare professional hat back on. So I would like to know who in the audience here is either a medical doctor or a diabetes educator or somebody else who works in healthcare. Okay, this is a shout out to you guys, my healthcare professional friends in the room here. Many endocrinologists, when they face new technology or new research results, you probably feel that they would be amazing, but you also fear like a certain change in your role as a healthcare professional, and you might ask yourself this question: how does my role change? Well, what doesn't change with DIY technology in the clinic is your patient-doctor relationship that is built on trust and empathy. That won't change with the DIY APS. Shared decision-making between doctor and patient will still be the same, hopefully. If you're not doing it already, then consider it. Education and training in sensor and pump usage is still essential to make a DIY APS work. Adjusting carb factors and ISF and fine-tuning the basal rates is still a must-do with a DIY APS. And support with school, with work, with travel will still be the same. So the DIY APS does not replace the endocrinologist. It just replaces the tools that we're using. What does, however, change, or what is likely to change with DIY in the clinic, is that the patients you take care of, they will have a complete data set. And isn't that amazing? Because I still remember the days where my endocrinologist was looking at me, or it's the way that I look at most of my patients that I see at Charité, is that they have some sort of diary or pictures taken from a phone exported to an Excel file, but it would never be 100% complete. With the DIY APS, you have the complete data set ready, because every decision is entered in the phone, in the system, to be executed in a decision for the DIY APS. What is also likely to change is an empowered patient, and happy patient, the clinical outcomes, better A1C, better time in range, less hypoglycemia, we've heard that already, and also various other outcomes will improve, better sleep, better quality of life, but also your own understanding as a medical doctor or a healthcare professional of diabetes might change. So these are basal rates at night, right? This is data from just 10 random nights from a friend of mine who is a doctor with type 1 and a DIY loop. His name is Bernhard. And these are 10 random nights. So these are sometimes on a shift, sometimes at home. And you see that not only the glucose graphs look totally different, but also the distribution amount of insulin every night is totally different. So what we were doing with basal the last 20 or 30 years was an illusion. It's never stable. What also changes as a doctor is that you develop a more dynamic understanding of the human body. It's no longer just having a blood sugar value and a dosage. You think ahead. You think more like a pancreas. And you think now in IOB, carbs on board. You think in glucose curves and integrals also as a doctor. So the way I care about my patients now, even if they are not in a DIY loop, has leverage from my own knowledge on a DIY loop, because I now think more dynamic instead of static. Now, for most of us healthcare professionals, DIY APS comes with legal and ethical concerns, but I think the 4 baseline values of medical ethics that are hundreds of years old, they perfectly apply to DIY APS. One of them is non-maleficence, first do no harm. One is beneficence. A practitioner should always act in the best interest of their patient. Another one is respect for autonomy. The patient has the right to refuse or choose their treatment, and this is about choice. And then lastly, justice and equity of everyone. And I'm never really sure if we can call DIY APS off-label, because off-label, after the definition, would be something that is approved and that you can prescribe for something else, or for a person in another age group. DIY APS has not been approved yet, so I would like to call it beyond label instead. And this, of course, causes an ethical dilemma. But for our patients, their time is now, so why should they wait? And if it helps, how can it be wrong? And as we have pointed out before, diabetes management is already 99% do-it-yourself. And therapy should already be highly individualized, right? Another aspect is that the state-of-the-art might change faster than clinical guidelines already. And guidelines are already just a best practice recommendation and no strict rule whatsoever in daily practice. And now I would like to point out a few experiences that we have collected with the DIY survey, where we ask people why they are doing this, and things that people reported from their experience with healthcare professionals. This, for example, is a 28-year-old man from New Zealand, and he said, "My healthcare professional did not know much about looping and initially wanted me not to do it, but after seeing my results, he is astounded about my percentage in range and sees that this is the future for type 1 management." And a 53-year-old woman from the US said, "My endo was very skeptical at first. Now he won't let me buy the newer artificial closed-loop systems because he states I cannot get that kind of control yet. He stated that in 2 more generations of Medtronic version, they will get where the loop is currently." And I think this is why the industry is invited to learn from us. It does not have to be like that. Another aspect that is frequently raised is safety, right? You've seen it works. And I would like you guys to reshape your way you think about DIY. This is what comes up when you Google DIY, right? It doesn't look very trustworthy. But how safe is open source? Who in the room has used OpenOffice or Mozilla Firefox before? Have you felt unsafe or criminal while doing that? Nobody, right? Open source is a different way to describe what we're doing. And again, if you ask yourself how safe is open source, Dana has pointed out already that these systems and devices are designed for safety. They are designed by people with type F diabetes, right? Friends and family, for their own children, for their own spouse. So why should they design something that's not safe for them? Nobody would do that. Nightscout alarm right there. But of course, especially when doing the doctor-patient talk, it's important to point out that it's highly experimental, it's strictly do-it-yourself at their own risk. And something that's also important to note is that this is a volunteer effort. None of us is making any money with that. Everybody who's supporting, who's coding, they are not doing this for money. They're doing this besides their day jobs. This also means that there's no company or no warranty, no hotline that you can call, and that there are no safety studies after the traditional understanding of medical device regulation behind that. But safety studies are underway, so there might be a couple of familiar faces in that picture. And this is a study that is led by Lenka Petrucelková from Prague, from the Czech Republic, and together with other people from mostly Europe, but also from New Zealand and Korea, she's planning a global safety trial with Android APS. Another effort that's on the way is coming from the US. You might have heard about that. That's a company called Tidepool, and they're trying to push iOS Loop, the DIY system that's working on an iPhone, on the FDA Fast Track program and to market. But coming back to safety, you've seen the slide already. Dana is talking about 11 million of hours, and I would just like to put that into perspective. So this next slide is German, right? But meanwhile, in the aircraft industry, they're doing this. When you're going on a flight, your airplane might just be tested 360 hours. And I think opposed to that, 11 million of hours of experience sound very differently. And we don't want to hold on to all this experience alone, so we want to publish it and let you guys all know what experience we collected in those 11 million hours. And here's scientific evidence from the first studies that have been reported. And Dana has shown these graphs already, so it doesn't really matter where people are from. There's a study from Italy, from Korea. There are different age groups, adults, pediatrics, but they all have different outcome results. And in the first study with the first closed loopers on OpenAPS, they came down from an A1C of 7 to 6, similar to the 1,000 people that we've seen before in that graph. Another survey that we've done, the unexpected gift I was talking about earlier, was the DIY survey, where we asked people with diabetes and caregivers for their motivation, why they build a DIY APS. And these were the people that responded, so most of them were adults, but 20% of them were caregivers of children on a DIY APS. Most of them were using Android APS, but there were a couple on Loop, there were a couple on OpenAPS, and about 6% indicated that they had personalized their system to something that they would call another system. They had an average experience of 10 months on these systems, and overall the group reported an A1C improvement of 0.8% from 7 to 6. So you see everything that applies to the first 40 loopers applies to the wider public as well. And the time and range improvement from the first study from Dana was also replicable, going up from 63 to 83%. And I think this is amazing because there recently was a consensus that over 70% of time and range is considered good and a therapy goal. With this type of DIY closed-loop systems, you're way above that. And we also asked people, because at the moment, diabetes tech is often a question of affordability and accessibility, if they had any out-of-pocket costs. And people indicated that they had out-of-pocket costs of roughly $700 per year. We're going to look into this and see what costs them actually money and if there are barriers that we can remove potentially.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty of geographic, I should think, variation in that number.
Absolutely, yeah. Also, it varies from system to system, obviously, and what you have covered by the health insurance, if you have to buy extra hardware or not. So we're looking into this. This is the pediatric subcohort that we included in our trial. So you see toddlers, but also adolescents. And these are their A1C values. The study is currently under review. We're hoping to get it published really soon. And in the black box plots, you see the A1Cs before and after. And there, I think you can see that the first A1C is already better, but it gets better over time. So there's a learning effect for yourself under DIY APS. And this is what happened to the time in range. So as you can see, it varied quite a lot before people started looping. But everyone, more or less, is getting to the same result, no matter where they started. And here are the results from our survey about motivations. And this is fairly small, so I'm reading that out loud for you. The top one motivation in both groups was to achieve better overall glycemic control. But there was one difference between caregivers and adults, and that was parents' sleep. In the parents' group, and who's surprised, their own sleep was their main incentive to build a DIY APS system, but closely followed up by better glycemic control. The next top two reason was to reduce the occurrence of acute complications, then followed up by long-term complication risk, and then to put diabetes management more on autopilot and interact less frequently with the system. And in the top five, there's also a lack of availability of closed-loop systems that were commercially available at all. This played quite a big role for them as well. Improving sleep quality for the person that's using it was a big reason, and then curiosity also played a role for some. Not so much for the parents, more for the adults using it, but medical or technical interests played a role for some of them. However, lack of support from doctors or psychologists was a minor reason. So this is like the very bottom of our list. And then we asked people for their stories. So they shared their own DIY APS stories with us, and these are the caregivers. What is the first thing that you see? Again, sleep. Then time. And these were the adults. And I think it's quite astonishing that the biggest word is better. And here are a couple of stories that we really liked. So we have a folder called Amazing Quotes. And here are a couple of them. It was a defining moment in my life as a parent. No one could stop me giving my child the care that they needed anymore, especially not a company who places shareholders above clients, which legally they must do. I was no longer at the mercy of markets, profits, politics, and whims. I had the capacity to provide for my own child again. Then another statement of a caregiver. We were waking at 11 p.m., 2 a.m., 5 a.m., etc. to manually blood glucose check our daughter. We haven't done that in years. I was having seizures from almost 5 years of not sleeping more than a couple of hours at time. Now we all sleep at night. And the seizures here refer to the parent without diabetes, right? Not to the child with diabetes. And another one that we really liked. If I could give my pancreas to my son, I would. But this is the next best available option. More amazing quotes to come on opendiabetes.eu over time. So, hashtag we're not waiting. What are you waiting for? Industry, healthcare professionals in the room, or other interested people, learn from the DIY community now, because we're going to liberate all that knowledge. Commercial solutions will be available someday, but today, every day with a better diabetes management counts, right? Remember the car and skateboard analogy. And I would like to close with a quote from Katie DeSimone, who is the lady behind the documentation for iOS Loop. And she said, "I can't wait for the day that my endocrinologist understands this photo without me explaining how we did it." So endocrinologists in the room, I'm really proud of you. You are now the ones that know about this. And with 2 autopilots in one picture, a Tesla and a DIY APS, I would like to say goodbye. Let's keep in touch. Here's my email, my Twitter handle. Let's be friends.